What happens when 800 years of sword mastery collides with 7 years of knighthood? Not a duel, a dismantling. Picture it, a samurai, raised in a world where hesitation meant death, facing off against a knight built for brute force warfare. One honed every motion through generations of ritualized killing. The other wrapped in steel, swinging heavy weapons taught to endure more than outthink. History never gave us this fight, but if it had, it wouldn't be a clash of equals. It would be a reckoning. Because samurai swordsmanship wasn't just about slicing, it was biomechanics, deception, and domination. It was a system designed to end lives before armor could matter. And the truth? The knight wouldn't stand a chance. Forget what Hollywood told you. This isn't fantasy. It's a cold, brutal reality. This is the real reason samurai swordsmanship wasn't just deadlier. It was on another level entirely. Training that created killing machines versus gentleman warriors. Here's where European knights faced their first insurmountable disadvantage. They were gentleman warriors trained for 7 years, competing against killing machines conditioned for life. Samurai training began at age 5 with wooden practice swords, developing muscle memory and reflexes during childhood when neural pathways formed most easily. By age 10, these future warriors possessed sword handling skills that exceeded adult European competency. Their entire physical and mental development occurred within martial conditioning that transformed basic human capabilities. European knights started formal weapon training around age 14 after their bodies had already developed without martial focus. 7 to 10 years of combat preparation, no matter how intensive, couldn't overcome the neurological advantages created by lifetime conditioning. Knights learned weapons as tools. Samurai became living weapons themselves. Daily practice regimens reveal the depth of this disparity. Samurai performed thousands of cutting motions every single day, developing muscle memory so refined their bodies could execute perfect techniques while their minds focused on tactical decisions. European training divided attention between mounted combat, multiple weapon systems, armor manipulation, and social obligations that came with noble status. Physical conditioning bordered on what modern sports science would consider extreme. Samurai developed supernatural reflexes through repetitive motion training that created neural pathways bypassing normal human reaction times. Knights relied primarily on strength and armor protection, training their bodies for power rather than precision. Mental discipline integration separated amateur fighters from transcendent warriors. Samurai combined sword work with meditation, breathing control, and philosophical study that unified mind and body into single combat instruments. European training focused on practical battlefield skills without the psychological development that created unshakable mental discipline. Combat philosophy differences created warriors with fundamentally different approaches to violence. Samurai pursued perfection through elimination of unnecessary movement, developing techniques so refined they could end fights in single motions. Knights emphasized domination through superior equipment and physical power, relying on armor and weapon advantages rather than pure skill. Muscle memory development occurred at cellular levels. Samurai training created automatic responses faster than conscious thought, allowing bodies to react to threats before minds processed danger. European muscle memory focused on coordinated movements between multiple pieces of equipment rather than seamless weapon integration. Balance and footwork training gave samurai mobility that made them nearly impossible to pin down or predict. European knights trained primarily for mounted combat and formation fighting lacked the individual movement skills necessary for fluid single combat. Could you imagine facing an opponent whose entire existence had been shaped around becoming the perfect individual killer? Someone whose reflexes operated faster than your ability to process what was happening, but superior training was only the beginning. The real advantage came from weapons designed by mathematical precision rather than battlefield tradition. Before we dive deeper into how weapon engineering created even more devastating advantages, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, because what we're about to reveal about the science behind these weapons will show you why this matchup was decided before it even began. Precision engineering versus battlefield pragmatism. Now we enter the realm of engineering genius that created weapons so perfectly designed they remain unsurpassed centuries later. What Japanese swordsmiths achieved through mathematical precision made European weapon design look like crude experimentation. Katana curvature wasn't decorative. It was biomechanical perfection calculated to match human arm movement exactly. Every degree of curve maximized cutting power while maintaining perfect balance, creating weapons that felt like extensions of the wielder's body. European longswords compromised between cutting, thrusting, and blocking capabilities, making them adequate for multiple purposes but perfect for none. Weight distribution created recovery times that seemed to violate physics. Katanas balanced at points that allowed lightning-fast direction changes and continuous cutting motions without pause. European swords, designed for power delivery rather than speed, required more time between strikes and offered fewer options for fluid combination attacks. Edge geometry reveals where true innovation separated amateur from master craftsmanship. Japanese smiths created blade profiles that maintained sharpness through countless impacts, while European weapons dulled quickly and required constant maintenance or replacement during extended combat. Single katanas could maintain cutting effectiveness through entire battles. Samurai blades weren't just sharp. They were forged from tamahagan, a rare high-carbon steel made by smelting iron sand in clay furnaces over days. Swordsmiths didn't just forge metal, they sculpted it, folding and purifying it by hand to create layered strength with surgical precision. But their true breakthrough was differential hardening. By applying clay to specific parts of the blade and quenching it at precise temperatures, they produced edges hard enough to cut through armor and spines flexible enough to absorb shock. One weapon, two steel types, something modern metallurgy still struggles to replicate. In contrast, European swords used uniform steel, limiting their function to a single trait at a time. Durability without flexibility, power without finesse. The katana was a living contradiction. Razor-sharp yet resilient, elegant yet brutal. Handle design integrated weapon and wielder into unified systems. Katana grips, wrapping techniques, and guard placement enabled techniques impossible with European sword construction. Knights wielded separate tools. Samurai became extensions of their weapons. Cutting efficiency measurements revealed devastating performance gaps. Controlled tests using identical targets show katanas achieving clean cuts where European weapons bind, chip, or require multiple strikes. Japanese blade geometry maintained cutting angles through entire swing arcs, while European weapons lost efficiency as angles changed. Combat endurance factors created compounding advantages over time. Katanas required less energy to achieve maximum cutting effects, allowing wielders to maintain peak performance longer. European weapons demanded more physical effort for equivalent results, exhausting users more quickly during sustained fighting. Maintenance requirements differed dramatically. Katanas maintained effectiveness with minimal field care, while European weapons required frequent sharpening, repair, or replacement. During extended campaigns, weapon degradation could eliminate night combat effectiveness entirely. Speed advantages weren't just about weight, they came from engineering that eliminated unnecessary resistance. Katana designs minimized air drag and optimized swing dynamics for maximum velocity generation. European weapons designed for impact force rather than speed couldn't match Japanese cutting velocities. Edge retention through combat separated professional from amateur weapon design. Japanese blades maintained razor sharpness through dozens of impacts, while European weapons lost cutting ability rapidly. Knights often carried multiple backup weapons. Samurai trusted single blades for entire battles. Could you imagine wielding a weapon so perfectly engineered it responded to the slightest pressure changes and maintained effectiveness no matter how intensively you used it? A blade that cut more efficiently as you grew more skilled rather than degrading with use. Yet even perfect weapons mean nothing without the combat methods to use them, and here's where the real massacre would begin. Combat methods that made victory inevitable. The blade was perfect, but the man behind it? That's where the real terror began. Samurai didn't fight, they executed. Every swing was a calculated dismantling of flesh, bone, and breath. While knights relied on strength and armor, samurai mastered the human body like a surgeon with a kill switch. No wasted motion, no second chances. This wasn't combat. It was a silent surgical system designed to end lives before the mind even realized it was dying. Ma'ai, often translated as interval or combat distance, was the invisible line between life and death. It wasn't just about physical range, it was the precise timing and spatial awareness that determined who struck first and who never got the chance. While European knights were trained to judge static distances for specific attacks, samurai mastered dynamic control of space. They didn't just measure range, they manipulated it, luring enemies in, dictating movement, and forcing mistakes. They didn't react to attacks. They engineered moments where attacking them was a death sentence. Timing coordination with opponents' breathing and heartbeat patterns created windows of vulnerability that knights never knew existed. Samurai could feel when enemies' guards weakened or attention shifted, delivering strikes during microsecond gaps in defense. European training focused on creating openings through force rather than recognizing natural vulnerabilities. Zanshin, continued awareness, maintained psychological pressure that broke opponents mentally before physical combat intensified. European knights fought through discrete exchanges, attacking then recovering. Samurai never stopped applying mental pressure, creating constant threat that exhausted enemies' psychological reserves. Circular cutting techniques transformed individual combat into choreographed executions. While European methods used linear attack patterns that committed to single directions, Japanese techniques flowed seamlessly between multiple angles, creating continuous cutting motions that opponents couldn't track or counter effectively. Iaijutsu, the art of drawing and cutting in a single motion, turned preparation into execution. There were no stances, no warnings, no wasted time. A samurai could go from stillness to a fatal strike in less than a heartbeat. While European knights needed time to ready their weapons and brace for impact, samurai ended fights before they began. By the time a knight realized the duel had started, his body was already on the way down. Simultaneous attack and defense destroyed European parry-riposte sequences completely. Knights learned to block attacks, then counterattack in separate motions. Samurai techniques deflected incoming strikes while delivering killing blows simultaneously, eliminating the time gaps that European methods required. Flow between techniques created perpetual motion that seemed supernatural. European combination attacks consisted of discrete moves with recovery time between strikes. Japanese methods linked every motion to the next without pause, maintaining continuous offensive pressure that allowed no breathing room for defense. Multiple opponent capabilities separated individual fighters from true masters. European training focused primarily on single combat or formation fighting. Samurai developed techniques specifically for engaging several enemies simultaneously, using movement patterns and cutting angles that could neutralize multiple threats in single actions. Psychological integration weaponized fear as effectively as steel. Samurai cultivated presence that intimidated opponents before combat began, using breathing, posture, and mental focus to project deadly intent that shook enemies' confidence. European knights relied on armor and reputation rather than personal psychological warfare. Environmental adaptability meant terrain advantages never favored knights consistently. Samurai trained across varied conditions and surfaces, developing balance and technique adjustments for any environment. Knights optimized for specific battlefield conditions found their advantages neutralized on unfamiliar ground. Breath control synchronization created stamina that seemed limitless. Samurai could maintain peak combat performance through extended engagements while opponents exhausted themselves. European burst power training left knights vulnerable during the inevitable energy crashes that followed intensive exertion. Recovery techniques from disadvantageous positions meant temporary setbacks didn't become permanent defeats. Samurai training included methods for regaining advantage from compromised positions, while European knights often couldn't recover from lost initiative or positioning mistakes. Could you imagine stepping into a fight where your opponent decides everything? The moment it begins, the space you're trapped in, how long you survive, and exactly how it ends? This wasn't mutual combat. It was precision-engineered destruction. And the most terrifying part? Every one of these advantages didn't just stand alone. They stacked, multiplied, and ruthlessly exploited the very flaws baked into the European way of war. What came next wasn't a duel. It was a dismantling, exploiting knight vulnerabilities that were built into their system. The knight's armor was thick, his weapon heavy, his training brutal. But against a samurai, none of it mattered. Because everything he relied on, his gear, his stance, his strategy, was exactly what the samurai was trained to dismantle. This wasn't just a mismatch, it was a methodical takedown of a system that never saw it coming. Armor dependency created mobility limitations that samurai could exploit ruthlessly, as knights were trained to rely on protection that reduced their movement speed, reaction time, and stamina significantly. Samurai learned to use superior mobility to control engagement distance, striking when and where armor couldn't protect while avoiding areas where it provided advantage. Weight distribution from metal protection affected balance and recovery time dramatically. Armored knights who lost footing or were knocked off balance required precious seconds to regain fighting position. Samurai techniques specifically targeted balance disruption, knowing that unbalanced opponents became helpless targets during recovery attempts. Joint vulnerability points in armor construction provided specific targets that samurai training addressed systematically. European armor protected against slashing attacks from similar weapons, but left gaps at joints that katana precision could exploit. Knights learned to defend against European attack patterns, not the angular approaches that Japanese techniques utilized. Weapon system limitations created dead zones that samurai could enter and dominate. European longswords required specific distances to be effective, leaving close combat ranges where their length became disadvantageous. Samurai trained specifically for these distance ranges, knowing how to get inside European weapon effectiveness zones. Shield dependency limited offensive options significantly. Knights using shields committed one hand to defense, reducing their attacking versatility and power. Samurai two-handed katana techniques generated more cutting force while maintaining defensive capabilities through weapon manipulation rather than separate equipment. Two-handed weapon commitment among some knights created timing vulnerabilities. Large European weapons required wind-up time and committed users to specific attack directions. Samurai learned to recognize these commitment moments and exploit the recovery time when knights couldn't change direction or defend effectively. Training gap exploitation revealed how unfamiliarity with curved blade geometry created fatal blind spots. European knights learned to judge distance and timing against straight weapons. Katana curvature changed cutting arcs and reach in ways that European experience couldn't predict accurately. Cultural combat assumptions about honorable engagement created tactical disadvantages. Knights expected mutual combat initiation and fair warning of attacks. Samurai first strike philosophy meant combat began when they decided, not when both parties agreed to fight. Different victory definitions meant knights and samurai fought toward incompatible goals. European concepts of honorable combat encouraged extended engagements and mutual respect. Japanese practical killing focus meant ending fights as quickly and completely as possible regardless of honor considerations. Physiological conditioning differences created stamina mismatches during extended combat. Knight burst power training optimized them for short duration, high-intensity fighting. Samurai cardiovascular development enabled sustained high-performance combat that could outlast European energy reserves. Environmental optimization meant knights performed best under specific battlefield conditions. Samurai trained for effectiveness across terrain types and fighting environments. Combat occurring outside knight specialty conditions immediately favored Japanese adaptability advantages. Equipment maintenance requirements created vulnerabilities during extended campaigns. Knights needed support personnel and resources to maintain armor and weapon effectiveness. Samurai equipment required minimal maintenance while providing consistent performance regardless of field conditions. Everything knights were trained to depend on, armor, strength, technique, became liabilities in the hands of opponents who understood their weaknesses better than they understood their own craft. And this wasn't just theory. When history put them face to face, the result wasn't a fight, it was a dismantling. Historical evidence and why. Modern analysis confirms samurai dominance. Historical documentation from the rare encounters between Japanese warriors and European fighters reveals patterns that confirm every theoretical advantage we've discussed. Portuguese and Dutch encounters with samurai during the 16th and 17th centuries provide eyewitness accounts of Japanese combat effectiveness that stunned European observers. Portuguese missionaries and traders documented samurai demonstrations that cut through multiple armor pieces in single strikes, achieving cutting feats that European weapons couldn't replicate. European observer accounts consistently describe Japanese combat speed that seemed supernatural to witnesses accustomed to European fighting methods. Dutch traders reported samurai drawing and striking so quickly that observers couldn't follow the blade movement, with opponents falling before witnesses realized attacks had occurred. Mixed military environments in colonial Asia produced moments where Japanese warriors faced European-trained combatants on neutral ground. And what unfolded wasn't a contest, but a correction. Time after time, samurai proved dominant not through brute force, but through decisiveness, tempo control, and strategic aggression. Japanese battlefield philosophy emphasized preemption and tempo disruption, principles that align shockingly well with modern doctrines of psychological warfare. Their goal wasn't just to defeat an enemy, but to unbalance them mentally before the fight ever began. Samurai culture didn't just outfight European methods, it outthought them. Motion science studies reveal that the curved trajectory of katana strikes maximizes muscle engagement across the entire kinetic chain, from foot pivot to wrist rotation, creating more power with less visible motion. European techniques favoring linear force application often burned more energy for less cutting depth. Weapon testing using scientific methods proves katana metallurgy and geometry create cutting performance that surpasses European equivalents significantly. Controlled tests using identical targets show Japanese blades achieving clean cuts where European weapons bind, chip, or require multiple strikes to achieve equivalent results. But even beyond weapons and motion, the training pipeline itself shaped unmatched warriors. Samurai began martial conditioning in early childhood, embedding muscle memory before the age most European knights began swordplay. This early exposure created combat fluency the way native language fluency develops, automatic, subconscious, and nearly impossible to replicate later in life. The neurological impact of that training can now be seen in fMRI scans of traditional martial artists. These scans show enhanced development in the cerebellum and motor cortex, regions tied to balance, coordination, and reaction time. Simply put, samurai weren't just more trained, they were neurologically optimized for violence. Modern military adoption of concepts from Japanese martial arts validates historical effectiveness claims. Contemporary special forces training incorporates principles from samurai methods because scientific analysis proves their superiority for individual combat applications. Combat simulation results from HEMA practitioners versus traditional Japanese techniques consistently favor Japanese methods when systems are compared directly. European martial arts revival experts acknowledge technical advantages in Japanese systems that their historical counterparts never developed. Video analysis of technique effectiveness across different scenarios demonstrates Japanese adaptability advantages that make them superior in varied combat conditions. European methods show consistency only within their specialized applications, while Japanese techniques maintain effectiveness across diverse situations. Materials science analysis confirms Japanese metallurgical achievements created blade properties that European methods couldn't replicate. Chemical composition studies reveal Japanese steel techniques producing characteristics that modern science can understand, but still struggles to duplicate consistently. Cutting test comparisons using controlled conditions eliminate variables that might favor one system over another. Results consistently show Japanese weapons and techniques achieving superior performance across multiple criteria including speed, efficiency, and effectiveness. Durability and edge retention measurements prove Japanese weapons maintained combat effectiveness longer than European equivalents. Laboratory testing confirms historical accounts claiming samurai could fight entire battles with single weapons while knights required multiple backup weapons. Archaeological evidence from battlefield sites shows wound patterns consistent with Japanese cutting techniques, achieving more severe trauma than European weapons produced. Skeletal analysis reveals cutting damage that European weapons couldn't create through their standard techniques. We don't need time machines to know how these matchups ended. The data is already in, and it all points in one direction. Understanding this superiority reveals something profound about human potential and the choices civilizations make about warfare. Why this superiority reveals something profound about human warfare. Synthesizing every advantage we've explored reveals an uncomfortable truth. The samurai possess such overwhelming combat superiority that individual knight skill, courage, or determination couldn't overcome the systematic advantages built into Japanese warrior development. Superior training, precision-engineered weapons, and advanced combat methods created gaps too wide for personal heroism to bridge. Broader implications extend beyond historical curiosity into fundamental questions about human development and specialization. Samurai culture made choices about warrior creation that European society never considered, dedicating resources and cultural focus to perfecting individual combat capabilities while European knights remained gentlemen warriors with divided attention. Specialization versus generalization affected combat effectiveness in ways that individual talent couldn't compensate for. Knights needed competency across multiple battlefield roles, weapon systems, and social obligations. Samurai focused exclusively on perfecting individual combat, creating depth of skill that generalized training couldn't match. Cultural focus created evolutionary pressure that refined Japanese methods beyond European equivalents over centuries. Constant warfare and cultural emphasis on martial perfection drove innovation that European feudalism, with its broader social responsibilities, never prioritized to the same degree. Modern relevance extends into contemporary military training and martial arts development. Understanding these historical advantages reveals principles that current combat training can apply, showing how depth of focus creates capabilities that broader, more balanced approaches cannot achieve. Resource allocation decisions made by entire civilizations affected individual warrior outcomes in ways that personal dedication couldn't overcome. Japanese society invested more heavily in creating perfect individual fighters, while European culture balanced warrior development against other social needs and responsibilities. Innovation driven by necessity produced solutions that comfort and security couldn't motivate. Japanese constant warfare created pressure for continuous improvement, while European feudal stability reduced the urgency for revolutionary combat development. Human potential limitations reveal themselves when comparing what intensive specialization can achieve versus more balanced development approaches. Samurai culture discovered human capabilities that other societies never explored because they weren't willing to pay the social costs required for such focused development. Training methodology implications show how early development during optimal learning periods creates advantages that later training can't duplicate. Japanese childhood conditioning produced capabilities that European adult learning couldn't match, regardless of effort or dedication invested. Historical context explains why these differences developed organically rather than through conscious choice. Geographic isolation, social structure, and warfare patterns created conditions that favored different approaches to warrior development, with Japanese conditions producing superior individual fighters. In one corner of the world, the samurai transformed violence into an art form. Ritualized, refined, and ruthlessly effective, these weren't just warriors, they were weapons shaped by centuries of precision. The real question isn't who would win. It's how long anyone else could survive once their blade was drawn. What other historical warrior matchups would you want to see analyzed using this same systematic approach? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if this changed how you think about historical combat effectiveness. Hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into warfare's deadliest secrets.